This is a very, very important year because at this time, the International Coalition for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons said that the open-ended working group, the OEWG, is meeting in Geneva, Switzerland on a plan to work together toward the abolition of nuclear weapons. And so for this reason, we're going to invite you at the closing of our prayer service, if you care to do so, to sign a letter, and there are 3 of them there. One is to Ambassador Samantha Powers, the other is to Secretary of State John Kerry, and the third is to Pamela
Hamamoto.
Homamoto. She is the ambassador who is in Geneva, Switzerland. It is a request that our government participate in this closing session of the open-ended working group and be part of the endeavor to support the ban on nuclear weapons. There's a ban on many other forms of destruction, like chemical weapons ban, etc. There is not yet a ban on nuclear weapons. So this is going to be a wonderful action, and I hope I have enough stationery there for everybody if you care to sign. But if you need to, you can always flip the paper over and sign on the back side. So a little bit about first our prayer service. It is going to be at the opening, Sister Carol will ring the ringing bell 3 times. And that will be our solemn opening for this. And after that, we will have 4 different readers. They will be reading from President Obama's speech that he gave at the Hiroshima Memorial Park in May 27th. We have a response for each reader, and after our response, Carol will again ring the ringing bell. Once we have those 4 readings, then we will take an opportunity to pick a flower and float a flower in the pond as a prayer for peace. Following that, we have a little litany to pray together, and then we have as our closing song, "Let There Be Peace on Earth." And so let us gather and prepare our hearts as we begin our prayer service this evening. And thank you again so much for being with us.
"71 years ago, on a bright, cloudless morning, death fell from the sky and the world was changed. A flash of light and a wall of fire destroyed a city and demonstrated that mankind possessed the means to destroy itself. Why do we come to this place, to Hiroshima? We come to ponder a terrible force unleashed in a not-so-distant past. We come to mourn the dead, including over 100,000 in Japanese men, women, and children, thousands of Koreans, a dozen Americans held prisoner. Their souls speak to us, and they ask us to look inward, to take stock of who we are and what we might become.
Remember, we cry out for peace.
That is why we come to this place. We stand here and force ourselves to imagine the moment the bomb fell. We force ourselves to feel the dread of children confused by what they see. We listen to a silent cry. We remember all the innocents killed across the arc of that terrible war, and the wars that came before, and the wars that will follow. Mere words cannot give voice to such suffering. But we have a shared responsibility to look directly into the eye of history and ask what we must do differently to curb such suffering again. Someday, the voices of Akasha will no longer be with us to bear witness. But the memory of the morning of August 6, 1945 must never fade. That memory allows us to fight complacency. It fuels our moral imagination. It allows us to change.
Still, every act of aggression between nations, every act of terror and corruption and cruelty and oppression that we see around the world shows our work is never done. We may not be able to eliminate man's capacity to do evil. So nations, a course that leads to the destruction of these stockpiles. We can stop the spread to new nations and secure deadly materials from fanatics. And yet, that is not enough. For we see around the world today how even the crudest rifles and barrel bombs can serve up violence on a terrible scale. We must change our mindset about war itself to prevent conflict through diplomacy and strive to end conflicts after they've begun, to see our growing interdependence as a cause for peaceful cooperation and not violent competition, to define our nations not by our capacity to destroy, but by what we build. And perhaps above all, we must reimagine our connection to one another as members of one human race. For this too is what makes our species unique. We're not bound by genetic code to repeat the mistakes of the past. We can learn. We can choose. We can tell our children a different story, one that describes a common humanity, one that makes war less likely and cruelty less easily accepted.
Remember, we cry out for peace.
The world was forever changed here, but today the children of this city will go through their day in peace. What a precious thing that is. It is worth protecting and then extending to every child. That is the future we can choose. a future in which Hiroshima and Nagasaki are known not as the dawn of atomic warfare, but as the start of our own moral awakening.
But maybe it'd be helpful for me to just read. Each of them is just slightly different because it addresses the person to whom it is addressed. So this one here is to Ambassador Ms. Samantha Powers. She is our ambassador at the United Nations. On the 71st anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as citizens of the United States of America, we call on you to support the UN's open-ended working group in taking forward multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations. The OEWG is mandated, it was mandated by the United States, to address a global issue related to international obligations. It is vital that our government stand with the majority of member nations that seek a treaty on nuclear disarmament. And I put this little line in as opposed to NATO's strategy of increasing the role of nuclear weapons for collective security. We underscore the importance of our government's leadership on nuclear disarmament as the OEWG considers and adopts its report to the UN General Assembly. We request that as Ambassador for the United States of America, you advocate that the OEWG's final report, which is due, their work is going to be during this week, ending on the 19th of August, so this is very timely. That the report clearly reflect the strong support of a large majority at the OEWG for the negotiation of a new legal instrument to ban nuclear weapons. Duly note the urgency of starting such negotiations. Make detailed mention of the legal provisions necessary for an explicit, comprehensive, and binding prohibition of nuclear weapons and of providing assistance or inducements to carry out prohibited actions. And assert clearly the OEWG's modus operandi of being open to all, blockable by none, and inclusive of civil society in moving forward multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations. The unconscionable destruction and deep immorality of nuclear weapons are universally recognized. We firmly believe that building collective security is incompatible with having nuclear weapons. The OEWG and related initiatives have now identified a path toward negotiating an essential legal instrument for attaining a world without nuclear weapons. Now is the time to carry that shared resolve forward in good faith with a firm recommendation from the OEWG to begin the negotiation of a nuclear weapons ban. All efforts by our government to that end are warranted and welcome. Now, it is especially significant that the Sisters of St. Agnes, who are a part of an NGO, member of an NGO at the United Nations, take this kind of action. We have every right to do it as a congregation, and we have a responsibility as citizens of the United States. So I would encourage you, if you are willing and wish to sign each of these letters. They're essentially the same, but each to a different person. And Susan Ledesma and I will see to it that it gets faxed to these individuals tomorrow, because it's very timely that it be done. And while this is happening here, these are the three different, you can start signing, yes, there's a pen by each one, right. And then one other thing that Sister Lucy brought to my attention on Friday, yes, she mentioned to me that there is a statue of Saint Agnes on permanent display in the nuclear disarmament display. And this statue of Saint Agnes was the lone statue, the lone item that survived in the bombing of Nagasaki. So it says here, the statue reminds visitors of horror. Tourists being guided through the UN headquarters lingered around the pock-marked stone statue of St. Agnes, which survived the atomic destruction of Nagasaki, Japan. This says 41 years ago, and we know now it was 71 years ago, right? The statue is one of the centerpieces of a permanent UN exhibit called Disarmament Now, Investment in Living Now. The exhibit, financed by the government of Japan, demonstrates through several dozen large transparencies and panels the destructive power of the atomic bombs which the United States dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 6 and 9, 1945. The statue of St. Agnes is the only object in the exhibit which survived the Nagasaki bombing. It stood about 600 yards from the epicenter of the blast, in front of the Urakami Catholic Cathedral. The UN guide told the visitors that the cathedral was largely destroyed, but the statue remains. So, yes. And anyone who wants to make a comment is welcome.
It's a large, like 5 or 6 feet tall, and it's broad. And the back of it is what's really pockmarked and scarred. The front of it is, it looks kind of natural in a way. I saw it last year with my niece, and it's when she took pictures of it afterwards with me with it. But it's just mind-boggling to see it and realize what really happened to it. So think of a large, tall, well-built statue.
Scott, yes.
Am I okay here? Sister Zalian, I want to thank you for making this possible, and to thank you as a member of the United States University, which, better now? Just to repeat, Sister Zalian, I want to thank you for making this possible. I guess you have to have it hand at an angle. And to be here among many of my friends that I've met and worked with over the years through United for Diversity and other ones at this beautiful setting. one reason I wanted to speak is because I lived in Japan for about 17 years, and I visited Hiroshima, the museum, several times. I visited. This way? Okay. A little bit tricky, isn't it? I visited the Hiroshima Museum several times, and it's always overwhelming. It always makes us feel so sad. The reason I first went to Japan, I was an exchange student from Goodrich High School. And I can tell you that the exchange, me being an exchange student, that was just a beginning. Because when I was there the first time, I went to the wedding of the sister of, that was in 1960s. I went to a wedding of the sister of my homestay family. And about 40 years later, I went to her daughter's wedding. And in the interim, the children and the grandchildren got to know my mother. They visited her, and they got to know her as Scott's mom. So this is a sad occasion, but now we see through. I can't imagine a war between the United States and Japan now. We have so many friends. We have our Japanese friends here today. So many connections between the two countries, and I think that makes all the difference. That we can look forward to a better future.
Yes, Diane.
This is just a suggestion that that story of the St. Agnes, especially this week, be put on our website, and a picture of it, because you can Google it. It's quite popular.
Great idea. Thank you. Mary Rose?
I like the quote that you have here at the end from Pope Francis. Okay. Pope Francis says, "There is an urgent need to work for a world free of nuclear weapons, in full application of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, in letter and spirit, with the goal of a complete prohibition of these weapons." If in our lifetime we could do that, would be great.